They say every kingdom leaves behind a crown. But in this land, even the crowns have turned to ash. Once, these trees bore fruit of gold and glory. Now, they bloom with silence and memory. Beneath the soil lie the bones of kings, and in the wind, their voices still whisper of the thrones they lost. What remains when power fades, and only the earth remembers your name? This is the tale of what grows after empires die, the story of Crown of Ashes.
The first light of dawn crept gently over the horizon, spilling a pale gold that filtered through the dense canopy of ancient branches overhead. In the heart of a hidden vale, shielded by mists and myth, lay the orchard, an expanse unlike any other, where each tree bore a legacy far heavier than mere fruit. Here, in the cradle of forgotten kings, the souls of monarchs lost to time and treachery dwelled, woven into the gnarled branches and cursed fruits that hung like jewels. Glowing faintly with an otherworldly light, Eamon moved among the trees with a reverence born of decades. His footsteps were soft against the mossy earth, his hands steady yet tender as they traced the bark of a solemn oak whose twisted limbs bore dark, heavy fruit. Each tree was a vessel of memory, pain and power, each fruit a prison and a promise. His weathered face, framed by silver-streaked dark hair, was etched with lines of care and solitude, often cloaked in earth-toned garb that blended seamlessly with the orchard's muted greens and browns. He paused beneath one such tree, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and something more elusive, a faint, bittersweet essence like sorrow folded into honey. Eamon closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, attuning himself to the whispering voices carried on the breeze. They were not wind, but something far older, the murmurs of fallen kings, bound eternally within these branches. Their stories were etched into the orchard's roots, a tapestry of glory and ruin that Eamon alone was sworn to protect. "You speak still," he murmured, his voice low and steady as if addressing an unseen council. "I hear you, and I remember." The orchard responded with a soft rustling, leaves shimmering faintly in the light. Each fruit pulsed with a dim glow, amber, crimson, and deepest violet, bearing the weight of ancient curses and the bloodlines of realms long since faded into legend. To pluck one was to unleash power and tragedy in equal measure. Eamon's life had been bound to this place since youth, raised by the gardener who came before him and taught the sacred rites of tending these haunted trees. He carried an ancient pruning knife, its blade worn but sharp, a symbol of his solemn duty. Every season, he performed the rituals necessary to maintain the orchard's fragile balance. Knowing that failure would mean not just the loss of these souls, but the descent of their power into the wrong hands. As he moved deeper into the grove, the morning stillness was broken by a faint, discordant sound, distant footsteps, the clatter of armor, and low murmurings that did not belong to the natural world. Eamon's keen eyes narrowed beneath furrowed brows. The orchard's protective spells had endured generations, but the scent of greed and ambition now crept closer, carried on the wind like a poison. He stopped beneath a tree heavy with cursed fruit, its pulsing light flickering like a heartbeat. Kneeling, Eamon whispered a protective incantation, his voice steady despite the weight pressing upon his chest. The magic shimmered briefly, weaving a shield of unseen threads around the sacred grove. Yet beneath the surface of his calm, a storm raged, the memories of lost family, the scars of past invasions, and the ever-present fear that this sacred place might fall. He was the last line of defense, the silent sentinel standing between the orchard and those who would harvest its power for destruction. The shadows at the orchard's edge lengthened as the sun climbed higher. Somewhere beyond the trees, the invaders drew nearer, their dark designs clear to Eamon's wary heart. But the orchard was alive, and so was its guardian. With a final glance at the glowing fruit, Eamon rose, his resolve hardening like the ancient wood beneath his hands. The battle for the soul of the orchard was about to begin, and in that moment of fragile dawn, the silence broke. The orchard lay cloaked beneath a heavy canopy of interwoven branches, where shafts of muted sunlight sifted through leaves thick with the weight of history. Eamon moved with deliberate care, each step muffled against the soft earth, his eyes tracing the gnarled trunks that rose like silent sentinels. The scent of rich soil mingled with the sweet, heavy aroma of fruits that pulsed faintly with a magic older than time itself. As he passed beneath the boughs, his voice dropped to a reverent whisper, a language older than words, spoken in murmurs meant only for the trees and the souls within them. "Rest now, ancient kings," he breathed. "Your days of war and crown are over, but your legacy endures here." The orchard was no ordinary grove. Each tree bore a soul, an echo of a monarch fallen to the relentless march of time and treachery. These souls were bound to the cursed fruits that shimmered with a dark luminescence, ripe with power yet heavy with the weight of tragedy. Eamon's fingers brushed a low-hanging cluster, feeling the subtle vibration beneath the bark, a heartbeat intertwined with his own. The orchard whispered back, voices like distant bells tolling a lament older than any living memory. His mind drifted to the orchard's origin, memories woven with shadows and light. Long ago, when kingdoms shattered beneath the blows of war and betrayal, a circle of sages had gathered in sorrow. They sought to preserve what the world had lost, the souls of kings whose reigns had ended in blood and fire. With ancient rites and somber chants, they planted the first trees, binding royal spirits within the roots and branches. It was a sacred act of remembrance and curse, a promise that though flesh was mortal, legacy might endure. Yet it was a terrible price to pay, the souls trapped in eternal guardianship, their power sealed within fruit that could grant dominion or doom. Eamon knelt by a tree whose bark shimmered faintly with a silver sheen, the fruit hanging like dark jewels. He whispered the names of the kings trapped within their triumphs, their betrayals, their downfall. "You are not forgotten," he vowed. A cold wind stirred the leaves, carrying with it a faint murmur that seemed to answer back. The orchard was alive, but restless. It knew the world beyond, and the shadows growing at its edges. The peaceful solitude was broken by a distant clatter, the faintest echo of footsteps on hardened earth. Eamon's gaze lifted toward the horizon where the twilight sky blended into shadows. The invaders were coming, men driven by greed, hunger for power, and dark ambition. They sought the cursed fruit, hungry to harvest the souls of kings for themselves. Eamon's heart tightened. The orchard's sanctuary was about to be shattered. He rose, drawing his ancient pruning knife from his belt, its blade etched with runes of protection and binding. The knife gleamed dully in the fading light, a tool of both nurture and defense. Eamon's thoughts turned inward, recalling lessons from the previous gardener who had raised him the delicate balance between life and death, growth and decay. To protect the orchard was to accept sacrifice, to bear the weight of 1,000 fallen legacies. As twilight deepened, the orchard seemed to hold its breath, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for the trees. Eamon moved to the heart of the grove, where the oldest and most potent tree stood. Its trunk was wide and knotted, branches heavy with fruit that pulsed like captured stars. It was the soul of the first king bound here, the founder of this sacred place. He laid a hand against the bark, feeling the silent power thrumming beneath, a reminder that the orchard was not merely a place of memory, but a living force. The air thickened with a low hum, the voices of the kings weaving through the leaves, telling stories of glory and ruin, warning of the dangers to come. Eamon closed his eyes, breathing deeply the mingled sense of earth and magic. He could almost hear the orchard's heartbeat, steady and strong beneath the coming storm. Suddenly, a sharp rustle broke the stillness. Eamon's eyes snapped open, scanning the shadows where the underbrush trembled. The invaders' scouts were near, their presence a dark stain upon the sacred grove. He slipped deeper into the thicket, his mind racing with plans and spells, readying the ancient magic that had protected the orchard for centuries. Eamon's solitude was his shield, but it was also his prison. Memories of loss and failure haunted him, his family lost to a previous invasion, a wound that never fully healed. Yet, amid the etching silence, a flicker of hope stirred. The orchard's magic was strong, and he was its guardian. He would face the coming darkness with the strength of those who had come before, wielding the cursed fruit not as a weapon of destruction, but as a beacon of legacy and rebirth. The orchard whispered once more, a chorus of voices rising with the evening breeze. "Protect us, guardian. We are the forgotten kings, but our power endures." Eamon tightened his grip on the pruning knife, a silent vow echoing in his heart. The orchard was his charge, its legacy his burden and his hope. And he would not let it fall. Night fell fully now, and the orchard's shadows deepened into a tapestry of mystery and magic. Somewhere beyond the trees, the first footsteps of the invaders marked the beginning of a conflict that would test every ounce of Eamon's resolve. But for now, in the quiet communion beneath the leaves, the souls of kings whispered their ancient secrets, and the gardener listened, readying himself for what was to come. As the stars blinked awake above the orchard, Eamon's thoughts lingered on the fragile balance between power and sacrifice, on the cursed fruit that bore both blessing and doom. The orchard was alive, its magic ancient and vast, and its fate entwined with his own. Tomorrow, the battle would begin, but tonight, he stood as the silent sentinel, the whisperer among the leaves, keeper of forgotten kings. And in that whisper lay the hope of rebirth. The orchard lay shrouded in the pale light of dawn, the mist weaving through the branches like restless spirits. Eamon moved with the grace of one intimately acquainted with every root and leaf, his boots barely disturbing the soft earth beneath. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and the faint, bittersweet aroma of the cursed fruit hanging heavy on the ancient trees, each a vessel for a lost monarch's soul. He paused beneath the twisted limbs of the oldest tree, its bark scarred by centuries yet thriving with a dark vitality. The fruit here was nearly black, pulsing faintly as though alive. Eamon's fingers traced the rough surface, whispering a low greeting to the ancient soul within. The orchard spoke to him in murmurs and sighs, a choir of kings long fallen but not forgotten. Yet something was amiss. The air, once tranquil and timeless, now carried a subtle discord. He felt it first in the tremble of a leaf, then in the distant rustle of underbrush too deliberate to be the wind. His sharp eyes scanned the shadowed edges where the orchard met the wild forest beyond. Signs of intrusion revealed themselves in broken branches, snapped twigs, and trampled leaves. Footprints, faint but unmistakable, marked the soft earth, the tread of human presence. Eamon's heart tightened, memories of past invasions clawing at his mind. He had failed once before. The weight of that failure pressed heavily upon him now. From the thicket emerged Lyra, her breath quick, eyes wide and wary. "Eamon," she whispered urgently, "I glimpsed figures beyond the trees. Scouts, no doubt. They move with purpose, stealth, but they come." Her voice was a mix of fear and determination, the youthful agility in her stance belying the gravity of her words. Eamon nodded grimly. "They seek the orchard's power," he said, his voice low and steady. "But they do not yet understand what they risk." Together, they moved silently through the orchard's border, marking the places where the invaders had disturbed the sacred ground. The cursed fruit hung like dark jewels, their surface mottled and strange, throbbing with the weight of ancient magic and sorrow. As the sun rose higher, piercing the mist with shafts of golden light, Eamon's thoughts turned inward. He remembered the faces of those he had lost, family and friends claimed by a past siege, victims of a greed he had vowed never to allow again. His duty was not just to guard trees, but to protect the souls entwined within them from the same fate. Yet the solitude of his role gnawed at him. The orchard's whispers comforted and isolated him in equal measure. Trust was a rarity, and hope a flicker threatened by shadows. The presence of Lyra, young and unburdened yet fiercely loyal, offered a fragile bridge to the wider world outside his sacred grove. The first shadows of war crept closer with each passing moment, and Eamon knew that the coming days would test not only the orchard's magic, but the very limits of his endurance and resolve. For now, he steeled himself beneath the boughs heavy with cursed fruit, listening to the silent voices of kings long fallen and preparing to face the intruders who dared threaten their eternal rest. As twilight approached, the orchard seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the next move in a game as old as the soil itself. Eamon's hand tightened on the ancient pruning knife at his belt, a symbol of both protection and sacrifice, and he whispered a solemn vow to the wind. The orchard would not fall on his watch, and somewhere beyond the trees, unseen eyes watched and waited, the shadows lengthening with purpose. The delicate balance of peace and peril had been broken at the orchard's edge. What came next would decide the fate of forgotten kings and the legacy they bore forever in fruit and flesh. Eamon turned his gaze to the darkening horizon, knowing the night ahead would be long and merciless, but his resolve had never been stronger. The orchard's secret was his burden, and he would carry it through the gathering storm, whatever the cost. The orchard lay quiet beneath a canopy woven of ancient boughs and whispered memories, the air thick with the scent of earth and the faint, bittersweet tang of the cursed fruit. Eamon moved like a shadow among the towering trees, his hands steady as he tended to the roots that carried the souls of fallen kings. His eyes, sharp yet wary, scanned the horizon where the forest met the rising sun, ever watchful for signs of those who sought to claim the orchard's power. It was then that a figure appeared at the edge of the grove, a lone silhouette framed by the awakening light. Scylla stepped forward, her fiery hair catching the dawn's first rays, a stark contrast to the muted earth tones that cloaked Eamon. She moved with a purpose born of both urgency and reverence, each step measured over moss and root. Her green eyes held a sharp wit tempered by a quiet sorrow, and as she paused before Eamon, the weight of unspoken history hung between them. "I come seeking forgiveness," Scylla said, voice firm yet laced with vulnerability, "for my family's part in taking from this place without understanding its true cost." Eamon regarded her silently, the lines etched across his face betraying the years of solitude and the burden he bore. Trust was not given lightly in the orchard, especially not to those whose bloodline once exploited its magic. Yet, beneath his guarded exterior, he sensed a flicker of sincerity in Scylla's words. "The orchard is no place for the reckless," he warned, his voice low and steady. "But if your heart is true, there may yet be a place for you among its guardians." Together, they walked deeper into the grove, the air alive with the murmurs of ancient souls entwined in bark and root. Scylla's knowledge of herbs and lore became apparent as she knelt beside a tree heavy with blood-red fruit, tracing faded symbols with delicate fingers. "These fruits bear the weight of monarchs long past," she mused, each seed a legacy of power and tragedy. Eamon nodded, sharing fragments of the orchard's origins, tales of betrayal, sacrifice, and the heavy price of guardianship. Through their exchange, a fragile alliance took root, binding their fates amid the orchard's timeless magic. Night fell, and around a crackling fire, shadows danced upon their faces as they spoke of the invaders' growing threat. Scylla's insights revealed the dark ambition driving Lord Marik's forces, not mere greed, but a hunger for dominion fueled by desperation. The orchard's cursed fruit was a prize that promised both power and ruin. "We will need every strength the orchard can offer," Eamon said, his gaze steady on the flames. "And every ally willing to stand for what must be protected." Scylla's nod was resolute, the firelight glinting in her eyes like embers of hope. As dawn crept over the horizon, they stood side by side at the orchard's edge, the quiet grove behind them and the shadow of war looming ahead. The path before them was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice. Yet, in the fragile bond fogs that night, there stirred a promise that even in the darkest of times, redemption and unity could bloom among the cursed leaves. Their story was only beginning. The orchard awaited its fate, and with it, the echoes of forgotten kings. Eamon's footsteps were silent on the soft earth as he made his way to the glade where the trees bore the heaviest fruit. The The morning mist clung to the leaves, shimmering with dew like countless tiny jewels. His ancient pruning knife, worn and etched with runes, hung at his side, a constant reminder of his sacred duty. A sudden rustle drew his gaze to the path, where the figure of a woman emerged from the shadows of the elder trees. Her presence was unexpected, yet not unwelcome. With a cautious yet steady approach, she revealed herself as Scylla, a name that stirred memories and questions. "Eamon," she greeted, voice soft but unwavering. "I have come to make amends and to help protect what remains." He studied her, the fiery red of her hair and the fierce intelligence in her gaze both a warning and a beacon. The orchard had known betrayal before. Trust was a precious, fragile thing, yet the weight of solitude had worn on him, and perhaps, he thought, it was time to share the burden. "Speak then," he said. "Tell me of your purpose and of the knowledge you bring." Scylla knelt beside a gnarled tree, her fingers brushing the scarred bark with reverence. "My family once harvested these fruits for power, blind to the sorrow they harvested alongside. I have studied the ancient ways, seeking to undo the harm and to guard the legacy instead." Her words stirred something within Eamon, a glimmer of hope, tempered by the caution born of years spent in lonely vigilance. Together they began to explore the orchard's depths, uncovering secrets long buried beneath root and leaf. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, they shared tales and plans by the firelight. The night air was thick with the scent of herbs and earth, the whispered voices of the souls in the trees a constant presence. "The invaders are closer than ever," Scylla warned. "Their greed blinds them, but their desperation makes them dangerous." Eamon nodded, the familiar weight settling on his shoulders. "Then we must be ready, not just to defend the orchard, but to protect the souls within." Their alliance, forged in the quiet sanctity of the orchard, was fragile but vital. In Scylla, Eamon found not only an ally but a mirror to his own hopes, and fears a companion to share the lonely path ahead. As night deepened, the orchard seemed to pulse with life, a living testament to the legacy of fallen kings and the guardians who vowed to honor them. And in the heart of that ancient grove, amid cursed fruit and whispered prayers, a new chapter began. The orchard's secrets were far from fully revealed, and the coming storm would test all they held dear. Yet, in the union of old wisdom and newfound courage, there was a spark, a fragile flame against the gathering dark. Eamon and Scylla stood side by side, ready to face whatever fate the orchard would demand. The fallen kings watched silently from their arboreal prisons, their legacy alive in the hands of those who dared to protect it. And so, beneath the endless canopy, the orchard waited silent, sacred, and eternal. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the faintest hint of danger. Eamon and Scylla, united by purpose yet divided by past wounds, prepared to confront the shadows gathering at the orchard's edge. Trust was a fragile gift, but it was all they had. The orchard's fate hung in the balance, and with it, the fragile hope of redemption and rebirth. The next dawn would bring reckoning. The fading light of day cast a gentle glow over the orchard's edge as Eamon and Scylla made their way along the winding path leading to old Bran's cabin. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient wood, a symphony of rustling leaves and distant bird calls accompanying their steps. Scylla's fiery hair caught the last rays of sun, her green eyes sharp and alert as she glanced around the encroaching forest that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Eamon's cloak brushed against the undergrowth, his fingers unconsciously brushing the familiar curve of the ancient pruning knife at his belt. Each step felt weighted, not only by the burden of the orchard, but by the knowledge that the shadows gathering beyond this sanctuary were unlike any he had faced before. Yet, beneath the surface, a flicker of comfort stirred at the thought of old Bran's counsel, a beacon from the past to guide them through the gathering darkness. The cabin came into view, nestled among gnarled oaks and cloaked in moss, its wooden beams weathered but sturdy against time's relentless march. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine and herbs. Old Bran stood at the threshold, his stooped figure framed by the amber light spilling from the windows. His tangled beard shimmered silver in the twilight, and his eyes, still bright with the fire of ancient knowledge, crinkled into a knowing smile upon seeing his visitors. "Eamon, Sila," he greeted in a voice roughened by years but steady as the earth beneath their feet. "Come in, come in. The orchard's need grows urgent, and we have much to speak of." Inside, the cabin was a sanctuary of relics and memories, shelves lined with dusty tomes, jars of dried herbs suspended from the ceiling, and faded paintings depicting regal figures whose faces bore the weight of history. The hearth blazed warmly, casting flickering shadows that danced upon the walls like restless spirits. Eamon settled into a worn wooden chair near the fire, the heat seeping into his weathered hands. Scylla perched on a stool across from Old Bran, her gaze unwavering as the old guardian began to speak. His voice, deep and gravelly, wove a tapestry of tales, stories of monarchs long fallen, their souls entwined with the orchard's roots, their legacies sealed within cursed fruit that bore the dual promise of power and tragedy. He spoke of kings who had sacrificed all for their realms, their spirits imprisoned yet eternal, whispering warnings through the leaves to those who tended the trees. Old Bran's words painted vivid images: a queen who had wept blood for a lost child, a warrior king whose final breath had been to curse his betrayers, a ruler whose hubris had doomed his line, and whose soul now bitterly awaited redemption. As the fire crackled, the room seemed to pulse with the weight of these memories, the heavy silence between tales filled with unspoken grief and respect. Scylla's fingers traced the rim of her cup, her expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. Eamon felt the familiar ache in his chest, the reminder that he was but the latest in a long line of guardians, each bearing scars invisible to the world. When the last embers glowed low, Old Bran's tone shifted, darkening with the gravity of what lay ahead. He spoke of a shadow creeping closer, a darkness not just of flesh and steel, but of magic corrupted and ambition twisted. The invaders were more than mere mercenaries. They were driven by a hunger that threatened to unravel the delicate balance the orchard maintained. The orchard's magic is ancient, Old Bran intoned, born of sacrifice and renewal. But its power is a double-edged sword. To wield it demands more than strength. It calls for wisdom and sacrifice. Many before us have fallen, their blood nourishing the roots, their souls entwined with the tree's fate. We must be prepared to pay that price once again. Eamon's gaze fell to the floor, the weight of legacy pressing heavily upon him. He thought of the family he had lost, the faces blurred by time yet etched indelibly in his heart. Scylla reached out, her hand steady upon his arm, a silent vow of solidarity. Outside, the wind stirred the branches, carrying with it the whispered voices of the orchard's silent kings. The night deepened, but within the cabin, a fragile flame of hope flickered amidst the shadows, a promise that even in the face of encroaching darkness, the legacy of the orchard would endure. As they prepared to depart, Old Bran pressed a small, worn talisman into Eamon's hand, its surface etched with ancient runes. "For protection," he said simply. "And remembrance," Eamon nodded, the talisman's weight a tangible reminder of the bond between past and present, guardian and orchard. The journey ahead would be perilous, but armed with knowledge and resolve, they would stand against the coming storm. The path back was quiet, the forest alive with the soft murmurs of unseen life. Eamon and Scylla moved with renewed purpose, the stories of Old Bran echoing in their minds, a solemn reminder that the orchard's fate was intertwined with theirs, and that to protect it was to embrace the sacrifices of those who came before. Night settled fully over the land, stars glittering faintly through the canopy. And somewhere deep within the orchard, a single cursed fruit glowed faintly, a beacon of legacy power and the enduring promise of rebirth. The orchard lay bathed in the cold silver light of the moon, shadows weaving between the ancient trunks like whispers of the past. Eamon moved silently among the trees, his gloved hands tracing the rugged bark, feeling the faint pulse of the souls ensnared within. Each tree was a monument to a fallen monarch, their legacies entwined in the gnarled roots and heavy boughs that bore cursed fruit. Tonight, the air was thick with a strange stillness, a silence that spoke volumes, as if the orchard itself was holding its breath. Eamon's eyes, dark and deepened by years of solemn vigil, lingered on a particular tree near the orchard's heart. Its bark was scarred with ancient runes, faintly glowing under the moon's gaze. This was the tree of King Caldor, the orchard's first sovereign soul, whose tragic tale had been etched into the very fabric of this sacred place. As Eamon knelt before the tree, a chill ran through him. The memories were coming unbidden, like a flood he had long tried to dam. The garden's whispers grew louder, the voices of the fallen king stirring in the night air. Eamon closed his eyes, letting the voices wash over him. Each soul carried a story of betrayal and sacrifice, but none more poignant than that of Caldor. Centuries ago, Caldor had ruled a prosperous kingdom, beloved by his people and trusted by his council. Yet in the shadows, his closest advisor, a man named Dranar, conspired against him. The betrayal was swift and brutal, a poisoned chalice, a staged uprising, a kingdom plunged into chaos. Caldor's spirit was bound to the orchard's soil by the ancient magic of the grove, his soul imprisoned within a cursed fruit that glowed faintly blue, a beacon of sorrow and eternal vigilance. Eamon's breath caught as the vision faded, leaving him alone beneath the tree once more. The weight of Caldor's fate pressed heavily upon him, a mirror to his own haunted past. His family had fallen victim to a previous siege, lost to the very invaders who now sought the orchard's power. That loss had forged his purpose, but also shackled him in solitude and guilt. Old Bran appeared quietly beside him, his stooped frame silhouetted against the moonlight. The old guardian's eyes shone with a mixture of wisdom and wariness as he began to recount the orchard's origins. His voice was low and steady, weaving a tapestry of history that spanned centuries, stories of kings and queens, of betrayal and valor, of curses born from greed and desperation. The orchard was born of betrayal, Bran intoned, a sanctuary forged to hold the souls of those who could not find peace in death. Each fruit is a vessel, a prison, and a legacy. To guard them is to bear the burden of their pasts, and to face the darkness that would seek to claim their power. Eamon listened, the old tale stirring a fierce resolve within him, yet also deepening his isolation. The orchard was not just a place of magic. It was a crucible of pain and sacrifice. As the night deepened, the distant sounds of movement stirred Eamon from his reverie. Beyond the orchard's borders, the rustle of armored mercenaries grew louder, their dark banners unfurling like shadows against the crimson blush of dusk. The invaders were coming, led by Lord Marek, whose hunger for power was as relentless as the decay creeping through the orchard's edges. Scylla stood close, her fiery hair a stark contrast to the somber woods. Her green eyes met Eamon's with a fierce determination, yet the weight of her own family's history with the orchard lay heavy between them. Together, they faced the approaching storm, bound by shared purpose and the unspoken understanding that the orchard's fate rested on their shoulders. Eamon's heart tightened as the echoes of betrayal intertwined with the present threat. The orchard's roots ran deep with sorrow and sacrifice, and its protection demanded a price, one he was only beginning to comprehend. As the first signs of the invaders' encroachment stirred the leaves, Eamon steeled himself. The coming days would test not only his skill and knowledge, but the very core of his spirit. He lifted his ancient pruning knife, its blade gleaming faintly in the moonlight, and whispered a vow to the orchard and the kings it sheltered. "I will not let you fall again." The orchard listened, its silent witness to centuries of loss and hope. And beneath the heavy boughs, the cursed fruit pulsed faintly, waiting for the next chapter in its eternal cycle. Yet, even as resolve burned bright, a shadow lingered, the isolation that gnawed at Eamon's soul, the fear that the betrayal of old might yet find new life. Would he stand alone against the coming darkness, Or could the fractured bonds of trust be mended in time? These questions hung in the night air unanswered, as the orchard held its breaths more waiting, watching, enduring. At the first light of dawn, a restless wind stirred the leaves of the orchard, carrying with it a faint but unmistakable clamor far beyond the ancient tree's protective boughs. Eamon stood at the edge of the grove, his gaze piercing the morning mist that clung to the horizon like a shroud. The silence that had long guarded the orchard was shattered footsteps, the harsh clinking of armor, and the low murmur of soldiers preparing for battle. His heart tightened beneath the weight of his solemn duty. Beside him, Sila's gaze was sharp and unwavering, her fingers deftly mixing herbs into a simmering concoction within a small iron cauldron. The fiery strands of her hair caught the amber glow of the rising sun, lending her an almost ethereal presence against the orchard's muted earth tones. "They come sooner than I feared," she whispered, her voice laced with both resolve and unease. Eamon nodded, drawing his ancient pruning knife from its worn leather sheath, a blade etched with runes that hummed faintly with latent magic. "We have little time. The orchard must not fall to their greed." The first wave of mercenaries appeared like shadows breaking through the mist, hulking figures clad in dark armor, their faces obscured beneath grim helmets. Fenric, their mercenary captain, stood at their forefront, his eyes cold and unyielding as he surveyed the grove. With a guttural shout, the attackers surged forward, weapons raised to tear into the sanctuary Eamon had sworn to protect. Eamon moved swiftly, his hands weaving through the air as he whispered incantations in a tongue older than any living memory. The cursed fruits hanging heavy on the branches began to glow with a spectral light, their surfaces shimmering with an otherworldly energy. Scylla poured her herbal mixtures onto the roots of the nearest trees, the ground itself responding with a faint tremor. Suddenly, the orchard seemed alive, branches coiled like serpents, leaves rustled with unnatural vigor, and the fruits pulsed as if breathing. A burst of power erupted from the grove, a radiant wave washing over the advancing mercenaries, forcing them back with cries of pain and surprise. The scent of crushed herbs mingled with the acrid tang of burning wood, filling the air with a potent reminder of the orchard's magic. Yet the invaders were not deterred for long. Fenric barked sharp commands, and the mercenaries regrouped with brutal efficiency, pressing the attack with renewed ferocity. Their siege tactics revealed a ruthless adaptability, cutting down saplings and clearing paths toward the orchard's heart. The clash of steel rang out like thunder, punctuated by the anguished cries of both man and tree. In the midst of the chaos, Eamon found a moment to crouch beside a young sapling, its bark scarred and bleeding a sap as dark as blood. He placed a hand upon the tree's trunk and closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind to the soul imprisoned within the cursed fruit. The monarch's voice was faint, a whisper born of centuries, laden with sorrow and warning. "They seek more than our strength," the soul murmured. "Their hunger is not for power alone, but for what lies beneath the secret that binds us all." Eamon's breath caught in his throat. The invader's greed was a surface wound. Beneath it lurked something far graver. A shadow stretched over the orchard, and with it, the realization that the coming battle would demand sacrifices he had yet to fathom. The first strike had been repelled, but the war for the orchard's soul was only beginning. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the bloodied earth, Eamon and Scylla prepared for the storm to come, their hearts steeled against the darkness encroaching upon their sacred charge. The whispering leaves carried a solemn truth. The orchard's fate and the souls it guarded hung precariously on the edge of a blade. The shadows beneath the ancient branches of the orchard were thickening, the dusk settling over the soul-bound trees like a heavy cloak. Eamon stood silently, his gaze tracing the darkened outlines of the orchard's perimeter, where flickers of movement betrayed the vigilant eyes of sentinels. The siege had settled into a tense lull, but the threat from Lord Marik's forces gnawed incessantly at the edges of his mind. Beside him, Scylla shifted restlessly, her fiery hair catching the last golden slants of daylight. "We cannot hold this ground alone much longer," she whispered, her voice low but edged with fierce determination. "The orchard needs more than just our hands and herbs. We need allies, those who know these woods and shadows better than we do." Eamon's gaze hardened. Trust was a scarce commodity in these times, especially after the betrayals that had already shaken their fragile defenses. Yet Scylla's words echoed a truth he had long resisted. Survival demanded unity, no matter how precarious. It was then that Lyra appeared, a lithe figure emerging gingerly from the surrounding forest. Her eyes, sharp and alert, flickered with a mixture of curiosity and caution as she approached. Clad in muted mossy greens that blended seamlessly with the wild undergrowth, she moved with a grace born of intimate knowledge of the woods. "I hear you guard the orchard, Eamon," Lyra said, her voice steady though carrying an undertone of urgency. "My people have watched your struggle from the shadows. We want to help." Eamon regarded her carefully, the weight of his responsibility pressing down. "Why should I trust you?" he asked bluntly, his tone betraying the isolation that had become his constant companion. "Because the same darkness threatens us all," she replied, meeting his gaze unwaveringly. "The invaders come not just for power, they will bring destruction to these lands if we do not stand together." Scylla stepped forward, interceding with a nod. "We need their knowledge of the forest paths, their eyes beyond the orchard's edge." After a long pause, Eamon's resolve softened. "Very well," he said. "But betray us, and you will find no mercy beneath these branches." The alliance was fragile, its foundation built on necessity rather than friendship. Still, as Lyra led Eamon and Scylla through secret paths, shrouded in thick ferns and ancient oaks, a flicker of hope stirred within the gardener's heart. The forest whispered around them, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of night birds, the scent of damp earth and moss reminders that life endured even in shadow. Back at the orchard's edge, a small band of forest folk gathered, their faces shadowed by hooded cloaks and resolve. Plans were whispered beneath the flickering light of a modest fire, strategies forged in the crucible of shared peril. Eamon listened, learning their rhythms, their knowledge of ambushes and hidden trails, and with each word, the walls of his solitude crumbled just a little. Yet, as night deepened, Eamon found himself drawn away from the murmuring council to the heart of the orchard. There, beneath the ancient limbs heavy with cursed fruit, he rested a hand on the gnarled bark of a soul-bearing tree. The rough texture spoke of centuries of silent watchfulness, of kings long fallen and legacies preserved. He closed his eyes, listening to the faint murmurs of the souls entwined within their hopes, regrets, and the unending cycle of power and sacrifice. The orchard was more than a battleground. It was a living testament to the burdens carried by those who came before. Tonight, with allies at his side, Eamon felt the stirrings of something new, hope tempered by solemn duty. The path ahead remained fraught with peril, but for the first time in many moons, he was not alone. But shadows lingered still, and the question echoed relentlessly in his mind: could trust, once broken, be truly mended? And would the bonds forged in shadow be strong enough to withstand the coming storm? As the firelight flickered and the cold night deepened, Eamon steeled himself for the trials yet to come. The orchard's fate, and the souls it sheltered, depended on it. "We move at first light," he declared quietly, turning back toward the gathered allies. "Together." And with those words, the fragile alliance was sealed, an ember of hope glowing defiantly against the encroaching darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and smoldering wood as dusk settled over the orchard's ancient boughs. From a jagged outcrop overlooking the verdant expanse, a figure stood rigid, his gaze piercing the dimming light. Fenric, the mercenary captain, was a man carved from hardship and battle, a scarred visage framed by unkempt dark hair, eyes cold as the steel he wielded. His armor bore the dents and scratches of countless skirmishes, yet he wore it as a second skin, a testament to his unyielding resolve. "Hold the line." Fenric's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the murmur of restless troops. Around him, a contingent of mercenaries adjusted their positions, weapons gleaming faintly in the twilight. The orchard lay before them, a tangled fortress of gnarled trunks and twisted roots, each tree a silent sentinel guarding the souls of forgotten kings. Fenric's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the defenses. The orchard's magic shimmered faintly like a veil, a fragile barrier woven by its guardian. But the mercenaries had their orders: to break through, to seize the cursed fruit and claim the power held within. Meanwhile, deeper within the encampment, shadows gathered beneath a canvas tent, its flaps fluttering in the chill evening breeze. Lord Morrick sat upon a low stool, his gaunt frame draped in dark armor etched with arcane symbols that pulsed with eerie light. Around him knelt figures swathed in black robes, their faces obscured beneath heavy hoods. The air thrummed with whispered incantations, ancient words that twisted the night air into tangible dread. "The orchard's magic is strong," Morrick murmured, his voice a low rasp, "but it is not eternal. The souls trapped within these trees are mine to command. With their power I will restore my house and crush those who defy me." The sorcerers nodded in silent assent, shadows flickering beneath their cloaks as they chanted in unison. Small bursts of dark energy leapt from their fingertips, striking the ground and sending tremors through the earth. The orchard's protective wards shuddered but held firm for now. Elsewhere, beneath the shelter of a twisted apple tree, Eamon crouched alongside Scylla. The fading light cast their faces in stark relief, his lined and weathered, hers fierce and determined. Between them, the ancient soil seemed to pulse with latent energy, whispered voices rising from the roots. "Fenric's tactics are brutal," Scylla whispered, her voice laced with urgency. "He won't hesitate to tear through the orchard if given the chance. We need to be ready." Eamon's gaze swept the horizon, where the first flickers of torchlight began to pierce the darkness. "I know," he replied quietly, "but brute force alone will not break the orchard. The magic here is older than any army. We must find strength in that." A sudden clash shattered the fragile calm. From the orchard's perimeter, mercenary scouts surged forward, their blades flashing under the moonlight. The defenders met them with staves and herbal charms, the air alive with the scent of crushed leaves and burning herbs. Steel sang against steel, cries of defiance mingling with the harsh commands of Fenric's men. Fenric himself led the charge, his war axe cleaving through branches and armor alike. Every strike was precise, every movement calculated to sow fear and confusion. Yet, even as the mercenaries pressed their assault, the orchard seemed to resist, roots twisting and branches swaying as if alive with will. Back in the encampment, Lord Morrick's sorcerers intensified their ritual, dark energies coalescing into a swirling vortex of power. The ground beneath the orchard trembled, leaves shuddered, and the cursed fruit glowed with a sinister light. Eamon felt the pulse of the orchard's magic faltering, the cost of the invaders' arcane assault seeping into the very soil he had sworn to protect. "We cannot hold much longer," Scylla said, eyes scanning the battlefield. "But if we use the orchard's power, it will come at a price." Eamon nodded, the weight of his duty pressing upon him like the heavy earth beneath their feet. "Then we must decide what we are willing to sacrifice." As the night deepened, the battle raged on a relentless torrent of steel, sorcery, and will. Fenric's mercenaries carved through the orchard's outer defenses, while Morrick's dark magic sought to unravel the ancient wards. Yet amidst the chaos, Eamon's voice rose above the din, calling to the forgotten kings whose souls lingered within the twisted branches. "Stand with me," he whispered, fingers brushing the bark of a cursed tree. "Together we will protect this place." The orchard responded with a surge of power, roots writhing like serpents, branches lashing out to fend off the invaders. The cursed fruit pulsed with a fierce light, both weapon and warning. Fenric snarled, rallying his men to press harder, while Morrick's eyes gleamed with dark promise. The siege had only just begun, and the battle for the orchard's soul was far from over. But Eamon was no longer alone. With Scylla at his side and the ancient magic awakening beneath his touch, he prepared to face the tempest, to defend the legacy of fallen kings at any cost. The orchard held its breath waiting, watching, ready to strike. And in that stillness, a single question echoed through the leaves: how far would one go to protect what is forgotten? The clash of steel and the murmur of magic blended into a symphony of defiance, as the mercenary captain's grim command met the orchard's ancient will. The night was alive with peril, and the fate of the sacred grove hung by a tenuous thread. Fenric's shadow loomed large, but so too did the resolve of its guardian. The next move would set the course for all that was to come. In the heart of the orchard, the war was just beginning. The orchard lay shrouded in an uneasy twilight, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint metallic tang of ripe, cursed fruit hanging heavy on the boughs. Eamon moved silently among the trees, his fingers brushing against the rough bark as if seeking answers from the ancient souls imprisoned within. The whispers of the fallen monarchs drifted faintly on the breeze, a chorus of sorrow and warning that seemed to stir the leaves in restless agitation. Around the small encampment nestled within the orchard's protective embrace, shadows flickered beneath the gnarled branches as the defenders gathered close to discuss the mounting threats. Scylla's fiery hair caught the last embers of the setting sun, her expression taut with worry yet resolute. "Eamon," she began, her voice low but firm, "there are signs that someone among us is betraying the orchard's trust. I found traces of unfamiliar footsteps near the northern grove, footsteps that do not match any we know." Eamon's gaze hardened, the weight of his burden pressing down upon him like the heavy cloak he wore. "We cannot afford division," he said quietly, though the knot of suspicion twisted tighter within his chest. "Yet if our defenses are compromised, the orchard will fall." Lyra appeared suddenly, emerging from the dense underbrush with a hurried breath and eyes wide with alarm. "I saw them," she whispered breathlessly, figures moving under the cover of darkness, speaking in hushed tones. "One wore a token I recognize, a mark of those who once served Lord Marek." The camp fell into tense silence, the flickering firelight casting ominous shadows over worried faces. Old Bran, seated near the hearth, stroked his tangled beard thoughtfully before speaking. "Betrayal has long been the thorn in the Guardian's side," he murmured. "The orchard's magic is bound by trust and secrecy. Once that bond is broken, the roots begin to rot." Eamon's mind raced, recalling the countless nights spent speaking to the trees and the souls they bore. Each monarch's story was etched in pain and sacrifice, a legacy he had sworn to protect. Now, that very legacy was threatened from within. He summoned Scylla and Lyra beside him beneath the canopy, their faces illuminated by the pale moonlight that filtered through the leaves. "We must uncover the traitor before they can do more harm," he said, voice steady but low. "This orchard is more than a grove of cursed fruit. It is a sanctuary, a living chronicle of kings long past. To lose it would be to lose the memory of all who came before." Scylla nodded, her emerald eyes fierce. "I will search the eastern paths for signs and listen for whispers among the roots. If the betrayer has left a trace, the orchard's magic will reveal it to me." Lyra's gaze flickered with determination. "And I will keep watch along the borders, swift and silent. No shadow will pass unnoticed." As the night deepened, Eamon found himself once again alone, the silence of the orchard pressing in around him. Memories of past failures haunted his thoughts, the family he had lost to an earlier invasion, the guilt that never quite faded. Yet amid the gathering darkness, a flicker of resolve kindled within his chest. He would not let the orchard fall. The coming days would test not only his strength, but the bonds forged in fire and shadow. Trust would become a fragile thread, and every whispered word might hide a serpent's tongue. Yet within this crucible, Eamon understood that the orchard's true power lay not only in the magic of its cursed fruit, but in the enduring spirit of those who tended it. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of forgotten kings, The seeds of doubt were sound seeds that would either blossom into betrayal or be uprooted by the steadfast will of a guardian who knew well the price of loss. The night air grew colder, carrying with it the faintest hint of danger, as if the orchard itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable reckoning to come. Eamon tightened his grip on the ancient pruning knife at his side, the weight of history settling around him like a shroud. Tomorrow, the orchard's fate would hang in the balance. But for now, all was silence and shadow, and the seeds of doubt took root beneath the whispered canopy. The twilight had long since faded beneath the dense canopy of the orchard. Yet the grove pulsed with a subtle light and ethereal glow emanating from the very fruits that hung heavy on the ancient branches. Eamon moved with deliberate care among the trees, his fingers brushing leaves that seemed to hum with latent energy. Tonight, he sought to delve deeper into the orchard's secret, to grasp the power whispered to him in dreams and in the trembling voices of the fallen kings housed within the cursed fruit. Cradling a single orb of iridescent fruit, Eamon observed its shifting hues, a swirling dance of blues and purples beneath the translucent skin. The air was thick with the scent of earth and magic, a blend that stirred memories buried deep within his heart. "They speak to me," he murmured softly, as if the very words might disturb the fragile balance. "They tell of strength beyond the flesh, but warn of the price to bear their burden." From the shadows emerged Scylla, her fiery hair catching the faint glow, eyes sharp and resolute. "You've been at it for hours," she said quietly, setting down a small satchel of herbs and tinctures. "There's only so much the orchard's magic can give before it takes its toll." Eamon met her gaze, a flicker of gratitude mingled with unease. "We have no choice. The invaders grow bolder each day. If I can wield the fruit's essence to shield the orchard, perhaps we can turn the tide." Scylla nodded, moving to set a simmering brew over a small fire. The air filled with the scent of crushed leaves and blooming nightshade, an aromatic reminder of the delicate balance between healing and harm. "I've studied the law," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "The cursed fruit is both weapon and prison. It can protect, but it can also consume the soul that harnesses it." Eamon's heart tightened. His past failures, the loss of family, the silence of the orchard, when he could not save them, all pressed heavily upon him. Yet the duty that bound him to this sacred grove was unyielding. "Then I must be vigilant," he replied, "not just for the orchard, but for myself." As they spoke, old Bran's low voice drifted from the edge of the clearing. The retired guardian settled beside the fire, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames, a tapestry of wrinkles etched with years of sorrow and wisdom. "Long ago," he began, "there were those who wielded the orchard's gifts recklessly. They sought to bend the royal souls to their will, only to find themselves ensnared in chains of their own making. Power without balance is a dagger turned inward." Eamon listened intently, the weight of old Bran's tales settling like a mantle upon his shoulders. "What must I do to avoid their fate?" he asked. "Remember that the orchard is alive," Bran answered. "It breathes with the legacies of kings and queens, their hopes and regrets entwined with every root and branch. To draw power from the fruit is to invite their voices into your own. You must be strong enough to bear their sorrow, wise enough to heed their counsel, and humble enough to relinquish control when the time comes." Night deepened around them, the stars obscured by the thick foliage. Suddenly, a sharp clamor shattered the stillness, shouts, and the clash of steel at the orchard's edge. Eamon's senses sharpened. The invaders had launched another assault. Without hesitation, Eamon reached for the glowing fruit, its surface now thrumming with vibrant energy. Closing his eyes, he summoned the latent power within, feeling the spectral essence pulse through his veins. A radiant shield blossomed outward, bathing the orchard's perimeter in a shimmering light that repelled the oncoming attackers with a force both beautiful and terrible. The invaders recoiled, their dark sorcery faltering before the orchard's wrath. Yet as the light faded, Eamon sagged, breath shallow, exhaustion carving deep lines into his face. Scylla rushed to his side, her voice laced with concern. "You pushed too far, you must rest." Eamon shook his head, resolve hardening within him. "The orchard needs me. I cannot falter now." But even as he spoke, a shadow crossed his gaze, the knowledge that every invocation of the fruit's power exacted a toll not only on his body, but on the fragile threads that bound his spirit to the orchard's eternal cycle. In the days that followed, Eamon trained with Scylla and Old Bran, learning to temper his newfound abilities with caution and reverence. Yet the invaders came again and again, each assault more desperate and dark than the last. The orchard itself seemed to respond, the cursed fruit glowing brighter, their voices growing louder in Eamon's mind, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a cry. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eamon stood beneath the boughs heavy with burdened fruit, the weight of kings pressing upon him. How much can one man carry? He wondered aloud. The orchard answered not with words, but with a sudden gust of wind that stirred the leaves into a shimmering dance. He knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, that the power he wielded was both a gift and a curse. Yet surrender was not an option. For the souls within the orchard, for the legacy he had sworn to protect, Eamon steeled himself to embrace the burden, whatever the cost. As night fell once more, the orchard stood silent but watchful, a living testament to the intertwined fate of power and sacrifice. And at its heart, Eamon prepared for the battles yet to come, the cursed fruit's glow a beacon of both hope and warning in the encroaching darkness. The orchard's magic was awakening, and so too was the Guardian's resolve. The next strike would not be merely a defense, but a reckoning. The forest beyond the orchard's perimeter whispered with the rustle of leaves and distant birdsong, a stark contrast to the tense silence that clung to the sacred grove. Eamon stood near the ancient heart of the orchard, his gaze tracing the mottled shadows cast by the towering soul-bearer trees. The wounds from recent skirmishes still atched beneath his earth-toned cloak, reminders of the cost borne by all who dared defend this hallowed ground. Beside him, Scylla's fiery hair caught the dim light, her green eyes sharp yet wary. "She comes," Scylla said softly, her voice threading through the stillness. From the forest's edge, a figure emerged, slender, purposeful, carrying a worn leather satchel heavy with the scents of dried herbs and salves. Nessa moved with measured grace, each step deliberate yet unburdened by hesitation. Her warm brown eyes held a quiet strength that seemed to promise healing where despair had taken root. As she crossed into the orchard's embrace, the tension that had coiled within Eamon's chest loosened just a fraction. "You must be Nessa," Eamon greeted, his voice low but laced with a rare softness. "Scylla has spoken well of you." Nessa inclined her head, a gentle smile softening her features. "And I have heard of you, Guardian. The orchard's wounds are many, yet so is its grace. I am here to help in whatever way I can." Together, they moved through the orchard's labyrinth of trees, where fruits glowed faintly with an otherworldly light, each a vessel of a monarch's soul. The air was thick with the mingled scents of earth and magic, a bittersweet perfume that told stories of sacrifice and legacy. Nessa's hands moved deftly as she unpacked her satchel, revealing bundles of herbs, tinctures, and cloths soaked in healing potions. The first injured fighter was a young scout caught in the mercenaries' crossfire, his leg torn and bleeding. Nessa knelt beside him, her voice a soothing murmur as she cleaned the wound with cool water drawn from the orchard's hidden spring. Her fingers were steady and sure, weaving poultices with herbs known only to those who understood the delicate balance between nature and magic. Eamon observed quietly, the sight stirring memories long buried the loss of his own family in an invasion much like this one. The helplessness that had shadowed him since youth. Yet here was Nessa, a living testament to kindness amidst chaos, tending wounds both physical and unseen. As the hours passed, more arrived battle-weary and bloodied, their faces drawn, but their spirits lifted by the healer's touch. Nessa moved with tireless grace, offering not just remedies but words of encouragement, reminding them of their shared purpose. The orchard, once a place of solitude for Eamon, became a refuge of communal strength. In a quiet moment, Scylla approached Eamon, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the cursed fruit overhead. "She does more than heal flesh," Scylla whispered. "She heals the soul, too." Eamon nodded, feeling the weight of his isolation begin to shift. The orchard's magic was potent, yes, but it was the fragile connections between its defenders that might truly save it. Suddenly, a sharp cry shattered the calm, the sound of shouts and clashing steel from the orchard's outer defenses. Nessa rose swiftly, her calm replaced by fierce resolve. "I will not abandon those who fight for this place," she declared, retrieving a small dagger from her satchel for protection. Eamon exchanged a glance with Scylla, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. In that instant, the healer was no longer a mere aid, but a vital part of their stand against the encroaching darkness. The orchard seemed to hold its breath as they prepared to face the next wave together, healer, herbalist, and guardian united by a fragile but unyielding hope. And as the cursed fruits hung heavy overhead, their glow flickering like distant stars, Eamon understood that while the orchard's fate was tied to ancient magic, its salvation rested in the courage and compassion of those who dared to protect it. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in many moons, the dawn felt like a promise rather than a threat. The orchard lay quiet beneath a sky bruised with the fading hues of dusk, a tapestry of shadows and whispers stretching across the ancient grove. Amidst this twilight, Scylla stepped forward, her fiery red hair catching the last glimmers of the sun as she gathered the small circle of defenders around a worn stone plinth. Her green eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces before her. Eamon, tall and grave; old Bran, stooped but bright-eyed; Lyra, youthful and alert, and met their wary gazes without falter. "I owe you all the truth," Scylla began, her voice steady but edged with the tremor of long-held burdens. "My family once harvested the orchard's fruits not as protectors, but as exploiters. They sought power without regard for the souls entangled within the trees, and for that, I carry the weight of their sins." A hush fell over the group. Eamon's eyes narrowed, the lines of his weathered face deepening as he processed her confession. Yet beneath the surface of his reserved demeanor, a flicker of understanding stirred. Here was not an enemy, but a soul seeking a path to atonement. "Why come now?" Eamon asked quietly, his voice a low rumble blending with the rustling leaves. "What makes you stand with us instead of against?" Scylla's gaze did not waver. "Because I have seen what greed brings: destruction, loss, a cycle that only ends when someone breaks it. I choose to break it now, with you." Old Bran stepped forward, his tangled beard catching moonlight as he nodded slowly. "Redemption is not given lightly, but it is earned through courage and sacrifice. Perhaps your knowledge is the key we need to withstand what comes." The group moved beneath the orchard's boughs, the air thick with the scent of earth and ripe, cursed fruit. Scylla shared the lore passed down through her lineage, how the fruits could be used not just for power, but for protection and healing, if handled with reverence and care. She described ancient herbal mixtures that could shield the orchard's defenders, and whispered incantations that might awaken the latent magic embedded in the roots themselves. Eamon listened, his usual reticence softening in the face of Scylla's determination. Together they wove plans, combining his deep knowledge of the orchard's magic with her expertise in herbal lore. The alliance was tentative but vital, a fragile bridge spanning the chasm of past wounds. As night deepened, the defenders gathered around a flickering fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on their faces, revealing the lines of exhaustion and resolve etched into their features. Lyra, the nimble scout, recounted sightings of the enemy's movements, her voice sharp with urgency. Old Bran, ever the storyteller, recalled tales of previous guardians who had faced darkness and prevailed, their sacrifices a beacon in the gathering gloom. Scylla produced a small bundle of herbs, lighting them carefully to release a fragrant smoke that curled through the air, mingling with the crackling fire. "Let this scent be a reminder," she said softly, "that even in the darkest times, there is a breath of life, a chance to heal and protect." The group inhaled deeply, the scent wrapping around them like a shield. For a moment, the weight of the orchard's legacy seemed lighter, carried not by one but by many united in purpose. Yet, as the fire dwindled to embers, an unspoken question lingered in the cool night air. Could this fragile alliance withstand the coming storm? Could Sila's redemption truly mend the wounds of the past and fortify them against the relentless tide of invasion? The orchard held its breath, shadows deepening between the ancient trees, where souls of forgotten kings whispered of sacrifice and rebirth. And in the heart of it all, Eamon and Sila stood together, guardians bound by conviction and the hope that their combined strength might yet preserve the sacred grove. The siege was coming, and with it, the fate of the orchard and all it sheltered would be tested like never before. As dawn approached, Sila's resolve hardened. She would fight not just for forgiveness, but for the future of the orchard, and for the souls that had been wronged generations ago. Her redemption was no longer a quiet hope, but a blazing commitment, a flame to light the path through the encroaching darkness. The battle for the orchard was only beginning, and Sila knew that in the crucible of war, true redemption would be forged. The orchard's silent watchers waited, their cursed fruit heavy with untold power, as the defenders prepared for the trials ahead, bound by legacy, sacrifice, and the fragile promise of renewal. And so, beneath the ancient boughs, a new chapter began, one where past sins met present courage, and where the faintest flicker of hope might yet turn the tide. The orchard whispered its secrets, and Sila listened, ready to heed its call. The path beneath Eamon's boots was softened by moss and the early mist that clung to the forest floor like a whispered secret. Each step carried the weight of anticipation, the solemnity of the journey pressing upon his shoulders as he approached the weather cabin where old Bran had chosen to dwell in exile. The air was rich with the scent of dried herbs bound in bundles and the faint smoke of a dying fire, a testament to the old man's enduring vigil over the secrets of the orchard. Old Bran greeted him with a nod, his stooped frame silhouetted against the dim interior light. His tangled beard and eyes, sharp despite the years, hinted at the wisdom and burdens he bore. "Eamon," he rasped, his voice like the rustle of ancient parchment, "the time has come to share what I have kept hidden. The orchard's power is greater than you know, but it demands a price few are willing to pay." Inside the cabin, faded tapestries hung on the walls, depicting the orchard through ages, past kings crowned beneath boughs heavy with glowing fruit, battles fought in dappled shade, and figures kneeling in reverence to the trees. Bran's finger traced the worn threads, his words painting a tapestry of sacrifice and rebirth. "These trees are not mere vessels," he murmured. "They are the nexus of a cycle older than kingdoms themselves. Each fruit holds a soul, yes, but also a fragment of the orchard's own essence. To command that essence, one must bind their own fate to it." With a creak, Bran moved to a small wooden chest, its surface scarred by time. From within, he withdrew a brittle scroll, its edges curled and runes faintly glowing in the flickering firelight. "This," he said, unrolling it carefully, "is the ritual of returning. It can awaken the dormant strength of the kings within their fruit, turning their sorrow and power into a shield against those who seek to plunder. But beware, it demands a sacrifice that touches the very soul of the guardian." Eamon's eyes scanned the ancient script, the weight of the task settling upon him like a mantle. "What price must I pay?" he asked, voice low but steady. Bran's gaze met his unwavering. "Your solitude must end. The orchard's magic thrives on connection to the land, to the souls it shelters, and to those who stand beside you. To awaken its full power, you must open your heart, risking pain and loss anew. Only then can the orchard's wrath be called forth without consuming you." The room grew silent save for the crackling fire and the distant call of a morning bird. Eamon's thoughts raced, memories of his lost family and years of solitary guardianship pressing against the promise of power. He knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, but the orchard's fate and his own demanded courage beyond fear. At dawn, beneath the gentle light that filtered through the orchard's canopy, Eamon stood among the trees, the scroll's knowledge etched into his mind. The leaves whispered ancient secrets on the breeze, a song of endurance and unyielding hope. With a deep breath, he vowed to embrace the sacrifice, to wield the orchard's magic not as a solitary sentinel, but as a leader bound to those who would stand with him. The coming battle would test every fiber of his being, but armed with Old Bran's secret, Eamon felt the first true stirrings of power, a beacon in the encroaching shadow, a chance to protect the souls of forgotten kings and the legacy they bore. And yet, as the light strengthened, so too did the shadow of sacrifice loom ever nearer, a reminder that in the orchard, nothing came without cost. The orchard lay shrouded in a pall of uneasy silence, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves stirred by a restless breeze. Eamon moved through the twisted groves with a measured step, each footfall muffled by a carpet of fallen leaves and the lingering scent of earth and decay. The cursed fruit hung heavy on the branches, their crimson and midnight hues pulsing faintly with the imprisoned souls of fallen kings. Tonight, however, the orchards and ancient magic seemed to thrum with a darker cadence, a warning whispered through the trembling boss. Eamon's eyes, sharp despite the wear of years, scanned the faces gathered beneath the gnarled canopy. Scylla stood close by, her fiery hair a stark blaze against the muted greens and browns, her gaze flickering with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Old Bran, stooped yet commanding, leaned heavily on his staff, the lines of his weathered face deepened by shadows and thought. Lyra, ever vigilant, paced near the orchard's edge, her youthful tension palpable. It was Scylla who first broke the silence. "Eamon," she said quietly, voice steady but edged with urgency, "there are whispers, signs that someone among us has betrayed the orchard's trust." Eamon's heart tightened, a cold weight settling upon his chest. Betrayal was a venom he had long feared, yet never fully prepared to confront. The orchard was not merely a grove of trees. It was a sanctuary of souls, a sacred trust passed down through generations. To have that trust broken from within was a wound deeper than any bee-blade. "Who?" Eamon asked, voice low and taut. Scylla hesitated, then met his gaze with unflinching honesty. "I cannot say for certain yet, but Lyra caught a shadow moving where none should be. A whispered word, a secret hand passing a forbidden token." Before Eamon could respond, Lyra appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. "I saw him," she said, nodding toward a figure lurking near the orchard's heart. "One of our own, speaking with the mercenaries under cover of night." A murmur rippled through the gathered defenders. Eamon's mind raced, piecing together the subtle signs he had dismissed until now, strange silences, misplaced supplies, and a creeping sense of unease that had settled like a fog. He stepped forward, voice rising with quiet authority. "Bring him here." Moments stretched taut as a man approached, tall, gaunt, his face shadowed beneath a hood. His eyes flickered with something that might once have been loyalty, but now gleamed with uncertainty and fear. "Why?" Eamon demanded. "Why betray the orchard, the kings whose souls you swore to protect?" The man's voice was a whisper, brittle with regret. "I did not choose this path. They threatened my family, promised safety in exchange for secrets. I meant no harm to the orchard itself." Scylla's eyes flashed with anger, yet Eamon silenced her with a raised hand. His own heart ached with the familiar sting of loss and compromise. Betrayal, even born of fear, is a blade that cuts deep. We cannot afford such wounds now. Old Bran stepped forward, his voice steady and grave. "I have seen this before. The orchard's magic is ancient, but it survives because those who guard it confront the darkness within as fiercely as that without." Eamon nodded slowly. "We must act swiftly. The orchard's fate depends on it." He turned to the gathered defenders. "Double the watch. Trust will be earned anew or broken utterly." Any who falter will face the consequences. The night deepened, fraught with restless whispers and the crackle of hastily prepared defenses. Eamon sat alone for a moment beneath the arching limbs of a tree heavy with cursed fruit, the faces of fallen kings flickering like shadows in the depths of the branches. "Forgive me," he whispered, touching the gnarled bark, "for I have failed you before. But I will not fail you now." Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the night, a scout's warning. The invaders had seized the moment sound by betrayal to press their advantage. Eamon rose, the ancient pruning knife at his belt gleaming in the moonlight, a symbol of both nurture and deadly resolve. "To arms," he commanded, voice ringing through the orchard. "Tonight, we fight not just for the orchard, but for every soul it holds." The defenders rallied, their hearts steeled by the revelation and the desperate hope that still lingered like dawn on the horizon. Though trust had been shattered, the roots of the orchard ran deep, and from the darkest soil, strength would grow anew. As the first light of dawn filtered through tangled branches, Eamon stood at the orchard's edge, eyes fixed on the coming storm. The traitor's mask had fallen away, revealing the fragile human beneath, but the orchard's legacy was eternal. And so was the fight to protect it. This was but one battle in an unending war, but Eamon knew that sometimes the greatest victory lay in the courage to face the wounds within as boldly as those without. The orchard waited, silent and watchful, as its guardian prepared for the trials yet to come. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, the seeds of hope and despair intertwined, poised to shape the fate of forgotten kings, and the gardener sworn to defend them. The air grew thick with smoke, and the scent of burning wood as the siege tightened its relentless grip on the orchard. Under a sky heavy with dark, roiling clouds, the once serene grove was transformed into a battlefield scarred by flame and shadow. The outer trees, many ancient and gnarled, bore wounds both physical and spiritual. Branches snapped and fell, their cursed fruits bruised and blackened by the onslaught. Flickering lanterns cast trembling shadows across shattered leaves, painting a grim mosaic of devastation. Eamon stood atop a low embankment, cloaked in earth-toned garb streaked with ash and sweat. His silver-streaked dark hair clung damply to his forehead as he surveyed the scene with solemn eyes. Beside him, Scylla moved with practiced grace, her fiery red hair a stark banner against the muted hues of the battlefield. She handed him a small vial of tincture, the scent of crushed herbs sharp and sweet, a fleeting reminder of life amidst ruin. "They grow bolder," Scylla murmured, voice taut with concern. "Fenric's men press harder, and Moric's sorcery deepens. We must hold, or all is lost." Eamon nodded grimly. "The orchard's roots run deep, but even the oldest tree can be felled. We will not falter." The first volley of flaming arrows streaked across the twilight, igniting dry leaves and kindling wildfires that licked hungrily at the orchard's edges. The crackle and pop of fire mingled with the clash of steel and the war cries of men. Defenders scrambled to quench the flames, their faces streaked with soot and fear. The orchard's magic pulsed faintly beneath their feet, a rhythm as old as the kings whose souls it guarded. Within the orchard's heart, the atmosphere grew darker still. A circle of dark sorcerers, clad in robes woven from shadows, chanted in guttural tongues. Their hands moved in intricate patterns, weaving enchantments that sent ripples through the cursed fruit. Each glowing orb throbbed with an eerie, pulsating light, as if alive with malignant intent. The air hummed, a low vibration that set nerves on edge and chilled the marrow. Eamon felt the weight of their magic pressing against the orchard's defenses. He raised his ancient pruning knife, its blade etched with runes of warding, and whispered an incantation taught to him by old Bran. The blade shimmered briefly, radiating a faint, protective glow. "They seek to corrupt the orchard's heart," Eamon said, voice steady despite the dread coiling within. "We must be their shield." Outside the circle of dark magic, Scylla and Nessa moved among the wounded. Scylla's hands were stained with crushed leaves and herbs, tending to cuts and bruises with swift, sure movements. Nessa's calm presence was a balm, her gentle hands applying salves and murmuring prayers to soothe the pain and stem bleeding. The scent of herbs mingled with the acrid smoke, a fragile perfume of hope in the encroaching darkness. "We cannot hold like this forever," Scylla said quietly to Aemon during a brief respite. "Their numbers grow and their sorcery poisons the land itself." Aemon's gaze darkened. "Then we must find strength in what remains. The orchard's legacy is not only in its trees but in those who guard it." From the battered ramparts, Fenric barked orders to his mercenaries with merciless efficiency. His voice was cold and commanding, a harsh contrast to the cries of the wounded and the crackling fires. Lyra darted through the shadows, her lithe form slipping past enemy lines to deliver urgent messages. Her green eyes flashed with determination and fear, the weight of the orchard's fate resting heavily on her young shoulders. "More arrows incoming," Lyra shouted, returning breathless to Aemon. They prepare a battering ram. Fenric rallies his men for a breach. Aemon's jaw clenched. "Prepare the wards." Scylla, ready the herbal wards and potions. Old Bran, see to the defenses. Lyra, warn the others. The defenders scrambled, their movements a desperate dance against the tightening noose of siege. Old Bran's gravelly voice carried through the chaos, reciting ancient incantations that bolstered the orchard's magic. The earth itself seemed to respond, roots twisting beneath the soil to form barriers and snares. As the battering ram thundered against the orchard's outer fence, Fenric's mercenaries surged forward, their war cries sharp and merciless. Aemon met them with his pruning knife flashing, the blade singing through the smoky air. The cursed fruit overhead glowed faintly, releasing pulses of energy that bolstered the defenders and seared their foes. Despite their fierce resistance, the defenders were pushed back inch by inch. The orchard's trees groaned under the assault, some succumbing to axe and fire. Aemon's heart ached with each falling branch, each lost soul within the cursed fruit endangered. In a rare moment of quiet, Scylla approached Aemon, her face streaked with dirt but resolute. "We cannot fight this alone. More must join us if the orchard is to survive." Aemon met her gaze, the weight of his duty pressing down like a stone. "We will find strength in unity, or perish divided." As night deepened, the siege showed no sign of abating. The orchard, wounded but unyielding, stood as a testament to sacrifice and endurance. Yet beneath the surface, the power that sustained it throbbed with growing urgency, hinting at a reckoning yet to come. The battle for the orchard was far from over, and Aemon knew that the true cost of guardianship was yet to be counted. The wind whispered through scorched branches, carrying with it the echoes of fallen kings and the promise of a dawn forged in fire and resolve. And so, beneath the darkened sky, the orchard braced for the next wave, its guardian ready to meet whatever fate awaited. The orchard was quiet in the fading light, the air thick with the scent of earth and ripening fruit. Yet for Aemon, silence was a double-edged sword. It brought a momentary reprieve from the clamor of impending battle, but it also summoned the ghosts of his past ghosts that clung to his heart like the withered leaves of the oldest trees. He moved slowly beneath the tangled boughs, the cursed fruit glowing faintly in the twilight like embers of forgotten fires. Each tree around him bore the mark of a fallen king, their souls entwined with the roots and branches, trapped in a liminal space between life and death. Aemon's fingers brushed the rough bark of an ancient oak, its limbs heavy with fruit that pulsed softly with a spectral light. The orchard was a sanctuary and a prison, a cradle of power and a tomb of tragedy. He closed his eyes, and the memories came unbidden, the screams of his family as flames consumed their home during an earlier invasion. The helplessness he felt as he watched them slip beyond his reach. That night had forged the solemn duty that now weighed upon him, a burden heavier than any sword or shield. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying the faintest echo of voices long silenced. He knelt, resting his forehead against the gnarled roots, seeking solace in the quiet communion of the orchard. "I have failed you," he murmured, voice breaking. "But I will not fail them again. A soft rustle interrupted his reverie, and Eamon looked up to see Scylla approaching. Her fiery hair caught the dying light, a vivid contrast to the muted greens and browns surrounding them. In her hands, she carried a small pouch of herbs, woven carefully with strands of silver and sage. She said nothing, but her presence was a balm to his loneliness, a reminder that he was not alone in this fight. Scylla knelt beside him, offering the pouch. "For strength," she said quietly, "and for healing." Eamon accepted it with a faint nod, his eyes shadowed but grateful. "Thank you, Scylla. Your courage gives me hope when I have little left." Together, they rose and made their way to the edge of the orchard, where old Bran awaited them. The elder's stooped figure was silhouetted against the flickering light of a small fire, his tangled beard and bright eyes lending him an air of timeless wisdom. As they gathered, Bran began to speak, his voice low and steady, weaving tales of kings long gone and sacrifices made in the name of legacy. "The orchard is more than soil and seed," Bran intoned. "It is the memory of those who came before, bound in fruit and root. Each tree is a sentinel of history, and each harvest a reckoning." Eamon listened intently, the weight of those words settling over him like a mantle. He understood now that his pain was part of a larger tapestry, a thread in the endless cycle of power loss and rebirth. The orchard demanded sacrifice, yes, but it also offered hope. As the moon rose high above them, pale and watchful, Eamon, Scylla, and old Bran stood together atop a ridge overlooking the orchard. The night air was sharp, stirring the leaves in a whispering chorus that seemed to echo their resolve. United by grief and determination, they faced the darkness ahead not as isolated souls, but as guardians bound by a shared purpose. Eamon's heart still bore the scars of his past, but beneath that pain blossomed a fierce flame of hope. The orchard was alive with magic and memory, and so was he. The coming battle would test them all, but with allies at his side and the legacy of kings within reach, Eamon was ready to face whatever dawn awaited. The orchard waited, silent but watchful, as the first stars blinked into existence. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the cursed fruit pulsed with ancient power waiting to be called upon. And Eamon knew the time was near. The burden of legacy was his to bear, but it would not break him. With a final look at the glowing trees, he stepped forward, the knife at his side gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The orchard's fate and his own hung suspended in the night, poised on the edge of a promise and a peril yet to come. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of forgotten kings, the gardener prepared to turn the page of his story, knowing that the next chapter would demand everything he had and more. The orchard lay cloaked in the deepening twilight, its ancient boughs swaying in a whispering wind that spoke of centuries past. Between the gnarled trunks, the cursed fruit hung heavy, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light that pulsed like a heartbeat in the growing darkness. Here, beneath the entwined branches, Eamon stood facing Lord Malric, the air thick with a tension that seemed to draw the very shadows closer. Malric's gaunt figure was stark against the soft luminescence of the orchard. His dark armor, etched with arcane runes that shimmered faintly, caught what little light remained, casting eerie reflections onto the surrounding trees. His cold, calculating eyes bore into Eamon's, but beneath that icy gaze flickered something unexpected, an anguished fire. A raw vulnerability that belied the ruthless warlord known to so many. "You see only a conqueror," Malric began, his voice low and rough like gravel over stone. "But I am a man broken by loss, driven by desperate hope, this orchard. These cursed fruits, they are not merely power to be seized. They are the last vestiges of my family's honor, the final threads holding together a legacy shattered by betrayal." Eamon listened, his brows furrowed beneath silver-streaked hair. For years, he had regarded Malric as little more than a ravenous invader, a shadow of greed and ambition that threatened the sacred grove. Yet now, standing beneath the very branches that held the souls of monarchs long faded into myth, he sensed a deeper story unraveling. "Your family's extinction?" Eamon asked, voice steady but laced with a hint of curiosity. Tell me what drove you to this madness." Marek's eyes darkened, and he gestured toward the orchard as if it bore witness to his confession. "Once, I was a lord of this realm, benevolent, respected. But treachery within my own bloodline led to my downfall. My lands were seized, my kin slaughtered or scattered. I sought forbidden magic to undo what fate had wrought, to restore what was lost. But the price was steep. The air tightened, the orchard's magic thrumming in quiet resonance around them. Eamon's gaze drifted to the cursed fruit, their faint glow casting spectral shadows on the ground. "And you believe consuming these souls will grant you that power?" Marek nodded slowly. "Not just power, redemption. A chance to turn back the relentless tide of oblivion." From the shadows, Scylla stepped forward, her fiery hair ablaze even in the dim. Her piercing green eyes regarded Marek with a mixture of skepticism and compassion. "Redemption comes at a cost," she said softly. "One that may consume more than just your family's legacy." Marek's expression hardened at her words, but there was a flicker of respect. "I do not deny the cost. But better to risk damnation than surrender to Arasha." Eamon felt the weight of her truth settle upon him. The orchard was more than a battleground for power, it was a crucible of history, pain, and hope. The souls within the cursed fruit were not mere trophies, but prisoners of a cycle that demanded sacrifice and understanding. A sudden rustling of leaves stirred the silence, a chill wind sweeping through the orchard as if nature itself responded to the heavy revelations. The scent of earth and ripe fruit mingled with the faint metallic tang of impending conflict. Eamon felt his heart quicken, the familiar pull of duty entwined with an unexpected empathy. "Your cause," Eamon said finally, voice steady yet softened, "is born of desperation. But this orchard is a sanctuary. Its magic is not a tool for reclaiming lost power, but a testament to the past, a warning to the future." Marek's gaze flickered, and for a moment, the gaunt lord seemed less a villain and more a man trapped by his own tragedy. Slowly he lowered his sword, the dark blade catching the orchard's ghostly light before resting point down in the soil. "Then we stand at a crossroads," Marek murmured. "Between destruction and preservation, vengeance and mercy." Eamon nodded, the burden of guardianship heavy on his shoulders. This revelation did not weaken his resolve, but it deepened his understanding of the enemy before him. The orchard was more than a prize to protect, it was a living history, a fragile hope entwined with sorrow and sacrifice. As dusk gave way to night, the cursed fruits pulsed softly, their light a solemn reminder of the legacy at stake. Eamon and Marek stood locked in silent accord, the future uncertain but the battle far from over. What price would they both pay to claim or save the orchard's magic? And could hope arise from the tangled roots of loss and ambition? The orchard waited, ancient and watchful, as the first stars pierced the velvet sky, heralding the storm to come. The orchard had never been more alive, nor more dangerous. The air hung thick with an electric charge, as if the very essence of the fallen kings whose souls nestled within the gnarled branches stirred in unrest. Eamon stood at the heart of the grove beneath the oldest tree, a colossal sentinel, whose trunk bore the scars of centuries, and whose branches stretched like skeletal arms against the bruised sky. The cursed fruits, swollen and darkened with the weight of centuries' grief and power, began to pulse with a crimson light that seeped through their cracked skins, casting an unearthly glow upon the mossy earth. A low murmur whispered through the leaves, a council of voices ancient and sorrowful. Eamon closed his eyes, listening to their lament and their fierce resolve. "They heed our call," he murmured, his voice barely above the rustling of the wind. His hand gripped the ancient pruning knife, its blade dulled by time, but charged anew with the magic that coursed through the soil beneath his feet. "Now, Eamon," old Bran's gravelly voice broke through the silence, steady as the earth itself. The old guardian stood nearby, leaning heavily on his gnarled staff, his eyes bright with the knowledge of ages. "The orchard's power is both a weapon and a ruin. Use it wisely, lest you become what you seek to destroy." Eamon nodded, drawing a deep breath that tasted of damp earth and decayed leaves. He began to chant, the words ancient and melodic, wrapping around the grove like a binding spell. The cursed fruit responded, their glow intensifying, veins of light bursting forth in tendrils that twined through the air like serpents. The ground trembled beneath him, and the wind rose in a howl, whipping branches into a frenzy. From the orchard's edge, the invaders advanced, mercenaries led by Fenric and dark sorcerers flanking Lord Marek himself. His gaunt form clad in armor etched with arcane symbols that shimmered in the twilight. His cold eyes fixed upon Eamon, calculating and unyielding. "Your resistance ends here," Gardener Marek spoke, his voice a razor cutting through the chaos. "The orchard's power will be mine." But Eamon was no longer just a guardian. He was the living conduit of a legacy far greater than any mortal ambition. As the chant reached its crescendo, the cursed fruit began to explode in bursts of spectral fire. Bright embers spiraled upward, illuminating the faces of friend and foe alike as glowing vines shot forth, ensnaring weapons and armor, sapping strength and will. Sela darted through the chaos, her fiery hair a beacon amid the shimmering shadows. She moved with grace and purpose, tending to the wounded and reinforcing Eamon's magic with her own knowledge of herbal lore.
"Hold the line!"
she called, her voice fierce and unwavering. The battlefield transformed, once a place of creeping vines and ancient trees, now a surreal arena bathed in crimson light and crackling energy. The invaders faltered, their formations breaking under the orchard's wrath. Fenric roared in frustration, swinging a heavy mace that was ensnared and crushed by glowing tendrils. Yet power exacts a price. Eamon felt it deep within his bones, the draining of life, the fraying of spirit. His legs weakened, breath coming in ragged gasps as the orchard's magic blood from the trees into him. He stumbled, the pruning knife slipping from his fingers to clatter against the leaf-strewn ground. Old Bran rushed to his side, steadying him with a firm grip. "You must endure, Eamon. The orchard's soul is bound to yours." Through the haze of pain, Eamon saw the orchard's souls whispering in mournful chorus, their voices a fragile thread between despair and hope. He knew then that this sacrifice was but a link in an unending chain legacy, and rebirth intertwined in endless cycle. As the last embers faded and silence reclaimed the grove, the invaders retreated, broken and diminished. The orchard, though scarred, stood resilient, its magic tempered by sacrifice and fierce guardianship. Eamon lay beneath the ancient tree, his body spent but his spirit alight with a newfound understanding. "This is not the end," he whispered, eyes closing to the gentle rustle of leaves. "The orchard lives, and so must I." But beyond the horizon, shadows stirred anew, and the price of this victory would soon reveal itself. The orchard's wrath had been unleashed, and the cost was yet to be fully borne. The night deepened around the orchard, thick with the scent of earth and smoke, as the souls of forgotten kings watched silently, their legacy alive in the trembling silence. The air hung heavy with smoke, and the acrid tang of scorched earth as the battle raged fiercely around the orchard's perimeter. Eamon stood at the heart of the fray, his breath ragged, muscles aching, yet his resolve unyielding. The once serene grove was now a maelstrom of clashing steel, incantations, and desperate cries. Old Bran's voice rose above the chaos, a resonant chant that wove through the claimer like a lifeline. His hands moved with practiced grace, invoking ancient wards that shimmered faintly in the dimming light. Around him, arrows tore through the air, some finding their mark in the ranks of the invaders, others embedding themselves in the gnarled bark of the orchard's sacred trees. Yet, amid his steadfast defense, a shadow loomed. A merciless volley caught old Bran unawares, and he staggered, clutching his side as a cruel spear found him. His eyes, usually bright with wisdom, clouded with pain before he crumpled to the ground, the ward flickering and fading with him. Sala's sharp cry cut through the tumult as she dashed to old Bran's side, her fiery hair aflame against the darkening sky. But barely had she knelt and tended to him before a piercing shout warned of another breach. Lyra, swift and nimble, had led the charge to seal the gap, but an ambush caught her in a deadly crossfire. She fell beneath a twisted oak, crimson staining the earth beneath her. Scylla reached her too late to save, her hands trembling as she pressed herbal poultices to wounds that no longer responded. Grief struck Scylla hard, her breath shallow and ragged, yet her eyes burned with defiance. Aemon, witnessing these losses, felt the crushing weight of his guardianship more keenly than ever. His heart clenched at the sight of his mentor and trusted scout fallen, the orchard's future suddenly more precarious. Yet, amid the despair, a fierce determination took root. He gripped his ancient pruning knife tighter, its worn handle familiar and grounding. "We carry their sacrifice forward," he murmured, voice steady but heavy. "The orchard demands it." The defenders rallied, their spirits lifted by Aemon's unwavering resolve. Scylla, though shaken, took up her place beside him, her knowledge of herbal magic now tinged with sorrow and fierce purpose. Nessa moved skillfully through the wounded, her healing hands bringing balm where she could, yet even her calm presence could not mask the toll the battle exacted. Fenric, observing from the shadows, snarled in frustration. The losses inflicted upon Marik's forces were mounting, and the defenders' renewed vigor threatened to turn the tide. He barked commands, urging his men forward, but even his brutal tactics faltered against the orchard's stubborn guardians. As twilight deepened, the orchard bore the scars of conflict. Branches were shattered, leaves torn and trampled, and the ground beneath was churned with the marks of desperate struggle. Yet, the cursed fruit still glowed faintly among the boughs, a spectral reminder of the souls contained within. Whispers drifted on the breeze, voices of fallen monarchs murmuring their solemn blessing and sorrow in equal measure. Aemon stood amidst the aftermath, the faces of the fallen etched into his memory. Old Bran's quiet wisdom, Lyra's swift courage, Scylla's undying hope, all now woven into the tapestry of the orchard's legacy. He knew the road ahead would demand even greater sacrifice, but the seed of endurance had been planted deep within their hearts. With the weight of loss pressing upon him, Aemon gazed toward the orchard's heart where the final battle loomed. The cursed fruit pulsed with latent power, a promise and a warning intertwined. For them, he vowed, "We will stand." The night deepened around the grove, stars flickering above like distant sentinels. The orchard breathed in quiet sorrow and fierce resolve, a living testament to the price of guardianship and the enduring spirit of those who protect the forgotten kings. Yet even as the defenders gathered strength, an uneasy silence fell, as if the orchard itself held its breath, waiting for the storm to come. And so, amid shadows and sacrifice, the story of the orchard's fate continued, its legacy a fragile flame flickering against the encroaching darkness. The storm clouds churned overhead like turbulent thoughts in Aemon's mind as he stood at the orchard's heart, the very nexus of magic and memory. Around him, the trees bent and twisted, their gnarled branches heavy with cursed fruit that pulsed with a spectral glow, casting wavering shadows upon the damp earth. The air was thick with the scent of rain, crushed leaves, and something deeper, an ancient sorrow tangled with the raw power of the souls imprisoned within the orchard's boughs. Across the clearing, Lord Marek emerged from the gathering darkness, his gaunt figure shrouded in armor etched with arcane symbols that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Aemon's with unyielding hunger. The merciless ambition that had driven him through years of betrayal and loss now burned brighter than ever, a desperate flame that sought to consume the orchard's power and bend it to his will. Aemon, Marek's voice was low and harsh, carrying the weight of a man who had once been noble but was now twisted by grief and dark magic. Your guardianship ends here. The souls of kings will no longer languish in hidden fruit. They will serve a true ruler, one who commands not just loyalty, but dominion. Aemon tightened his grip on the ancient pruning knife at his side, its blade faintly glowing with ethereal light, a gift from the orchard itself, forged in the sacrifices of generations past. The orchard is no tool for tyranny, Marek. It is a sanctuary for those who gave all for their realms. I will not let you desecrate their legacy. A fierce wind swept through the clearing, rustling leaves and stirring the cursed fruit until they seemed to pulse like hearts beating in unison. The orchard responded, a living, breathing entity entwined with the souls it protected. Whispered voices rose from the branches, voices of fallen monarchs lamenting their fate yet lending strength to their guardian. Marek raised a gauntleted hand, dark energy crackling at his fingertips. Shadows coalesced into tendrils that lashed toward Eamon, but the gardener was ready. With a swift motion, he slashed through the air, the pruning knife singing as it cleaved one shadowy strike after another. Each cut released bursts of silvery light, fragments of the orchard's magic that burned away the darkness. The battle escalated swiftly. The cursed fruit bloomed violently, cracking open to release shimmering sap that dripped like blood upon the earth. The orchard's branches writhed, ensnaring both combatants in a tangled embrace, their whispers growing louder echoes of legacy, sacrifice, and the tragic histories bound within the grove. Eamon felt the orchard's power surge through his veins, a double-edged gift that bolstered his strength but threatened to consume his very soul. Memories of those he failed haunted the edges of his mind, his family lost in a previous invasion, their voices a mournful chorus urging him forward. Marek's eyes gleamed with a mixture of fury and desperation as he conjured a torrent of dark magic, aiming to overwhelm Eamon. But the gardener's resolve was unyielding. Channeling the orchard's magic, he transformed the cursed fruit into weapons, glowing orbs that erupted with blinding light upon impact, scattering Marek's forces and disrupting his sorcery. Just as the tide seemed to turn, cries rang out from the orchard's edge. Scylla and old Bran appeared, their presence a beacon in the chaos. Scylla's fiery hair gleamed even in the dim light as she wielded her knowledge of herbal magic, casting protective wards and healing spells. Old Bran's voice, rasping and filled with ancient wisdom, called upon forgotten enchantments that bound the orchard's roots and branches tighter, restraining Marek's movements. Together, they formed a fragile bulwark around Eamon, buying him precious moments to gather strength. Yet the cost was evident. Scylla's face was pale, her breath ragged, and old Bran's stooped form trembled with exhaustion. The orchard itself seemed to pulse with pain, its magic taxed by the desperate struggle. Eamon found himself locked in a final, desperate struggle with Marek beneath the oldest tree, its trunk wide and scarred, bearing the deepest curses and memories. Their blades clashed, light against shadow, legacy against ambition. Each strike was a story, each parry a testament to years of sacrifice. In a moment of clarity, Eamon summoned the full power of the orchard, the cursed fruit glowing with an intense, almost blinding light. He plunged his pruning knife into the heartwood of the ancient tree, releasing a wave of magic that surged outward, binding Marek in spectral chains forged from the souls of the fallen kings. Marek's scream echoed through the orchard, a sound both human and unearthly, fading into silence as the magic sealed his fate. The orchard settled, the branches ceasing their restless twisting, the cursed fruit dimming to a soft, steady glow. Eamon collapsed to his knees, exhaustion and relief washing over him in equal measure. Around him, Scylla and old Bran tended to their wounds, their eyes reflecting both sorrow for what was lost and hope for what might yet be. "The orchard is safe," Eamon whispered, though he knew the cost had been immense. The legacy of the forgotten kings was preserved, but at a price that would echo through the seasons to come. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light through the branches, Eamon looked to the future, aware that guardianship was an unending cycle of sacrifice and renewal. The orchard remained, a living testament to the enduring power of legacy, the price of protection, and the hope born from the darkest of trials. But even in victory, the question lingered. How long could such a fragile piece endure, and what new shadows might one day seek the orchard's cursed fruit? The battle was won, but the story of the orchard, and its forgotten kings was far from over. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the tattered canopy of the orchard, casting long shadows over the scarred earth. Eamon stood quietly amidst the ruins, the weight of the night's battle still pressing heavily upon his shoulders. The once vibrant branches, heavy with cursed fruit and the souls of forgotten kings, now lay broken and smoldering. The air carried the acrid scent of smoke, mingled with the faint sweetness of crushed fruit that had spilled onto the soil. Silence hung thick, broken only by the distant calls of birds returning to the wounded groves. Eamon's gaze swept slowly over the devastation. Where once proud trees had stood like silent sentinels, gnarled trunks now lay shattered, their noble burdens released or lost. The orchard was safe, no invader dared remain, but the cost was unmistakable. Each fallen tree was a monarch lost he knew, their legacy now entwined with the blood and sacrifice of the defenders. He knelt beside one such tree, its bark scorched and peeling, the cursed fruit blackened and cracked. His fingers closed around the ancient pruning knife he always carried, its blade dulled but steadfast. "Rest now," he murmured softly, voice rough with exhaustion and grief. "Your burden is done." From nearby, the rustle of movement drew his attention. Scylla emerged from the shadows, her fiery hair a vivid contrast against the grey dawn. She cradled a small sapling, its leaves fragile but shimmering faintly with a green glow. Kneeling beside the wounded plant, she whispered an incantation in a language old as the orchard itself. The sapling pulsed gently, a fragile heartbeat amid ruin. "This one may yet stand," Scylla said softly, eyes meeting Eamon's with a spark of cautious hope. "We will tend to what remains, and they will grow again." Eamon nodded, the slightest flicker of a smile brushing his lips. The orchard was wounded, but not broken. Not yet. Nearby, old Bran gathered a small circle of survivors around a flickering campfire. His stooped form cast long shadows as he spoke in his gravelly voice, recounting tales of guardians past the sacrifices, the betrayals, and the price paid to keep the orchard safe through centuries. His stories wove a tapestry of history and warning, binding the weary souls around him with a shared purpose. "Our duty is not ended," he said, voice thick with age and resolve. "The orchard demands vigilance. It breeds sacrifice, but from sacrifice comes renewal." At the edge of the firelight, Nessa moved quietly, her hands steady as she arranged herbs and poultices on the ground. Her gentle touch soothed the wounded and weary alike. The defenders, battered but unbroken, gathered around her, their exhaustion etched deep into their faces. Yet in her presence, a balm of compassion seemed to mend unseen fractures. Eamon watched them, all the allies who had stood firm through the siege, the fragile beginnings of new growth, and the silent echoes of those lost. The orchard was changed irrevocably. The cursed fruit still bore its tragic legacy, but now it also carried the hope born from their sacrifice. He rose slowly, the weight of his role settling anew. Guardianship was not a mantle lightly worn. It demanded constant vigilance, endless sacrifice, and the willingness to face despair without faltering. Yet as the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light over the battered land, Eamon felt the stirrings of something more: renewal, connection, and a future forged from the ashes. "We have won this battle," he said quietly to Scylla as they began to survey the orchard's edges. "But the orchard's story is far from over. We must heal what has been broken, tend to the roots of power and pain alike, and prepare for the days to come." Scylla nodded, determination shining in her green eyes. "Together," she replied, "we will see it through." As the survivors set to work, Eamon allowed himself a moment to speak once more to the trees, to the souls nestled within their cursed fruit. "Rest now, forgotten kings," he whispered. "Your legacy lives. We will guard it, no matter the cost." Beyond the orchard's bounds, the forest whispered in the morning breeze a quiet promise that, though scarred, the orchard endured. The cycle of legacy and rebirth would continue, bound by the steadfast hearts of those who refused to let the past fade into silence. But in the depths of his heart, Eamon knew the road ahead would be long and fraught. The orchard's magic was ancient and wild. Its protection was an eternal vigil. Yet as the first new buds began to stir among the branches, a fragile hope took root. The orchard was alive, and so was its guardian. The orchard breathed deeply beneath Eamon's feet, a living tapestry woven from history, magic, and sacrifice. The bitter scent of the cursed fruits still lingered in the air, yet amidst this heavy remembrance, there blossomed a new fragrance, one of hope, renewal, and the enduring promise of rebirth. Eamon stood tall beneath the ancient boughs, the silver strands of his weathered hair catching the dappling sunlight filtering through the leaves. He watched as petals unfurled slowly on the soul-bearing trees, their fragile forms trembling with the first breath of spring. Each bloom was a testament to the orchard's resilience, to the kings and queens who had once ruled realms now forgotten, yet whose legacies clung tightly to the roots and branches. He felt the weight of his duty settle differently now, less a crushing burden, and more a sacred trust shared among those who had stood alongside him through the darkest hours. Scylla moved beside him, her fiery hair a vivid flame against the muted greens and browns. Together, they knelt by a slender sapling, fingers deftly weaving protective charms from herbs gathered in the orchard's shadow. "This one will grow strong," Scylla whispered, her voice soft but certain. "The orchard's magic flows through us all now, Eamon, not just through you." Eamon nodded, the old walls around his heart shifting imperceptibly. It is time the orchard was no longer a prison for souls, but a sanctuary for those who protect them. Old Bran's gravelly voice broke through the quiet. Seated on a moss-covered stone nearby, the retired guardian's eyes gleamed with the light of countless stories. "The cycle is eternal," he said. "Kings fall, powers fade, but the orchard endures. It is the memory of sacrifice, the echo of legacy. You have learned well, Eamon, that to guard is not merely to hold fast, but to let go when the time comes." Eamon's gaze lifted to the horizon where the sun set in a blaze of amber and rose, casting long shadows that danced like ancient spirits among the trees. The orchard whispered to him not in the haunting tones of the past, but in a melody of life sustained and futures yet unwritten. Lyra flitted between the rows of trees, her nimble hands tending to the saplings with patient care. Nessa followed, her gentle touch coaxing vitality back into wounded branches and broken limbs. Their quiet diligence was a balm to the orchard's battered heart, a symbol of the new guardianship blossoming from the ashes of conflict. Eamon watched them, a swell of pride and hope filling his chest. The orchard was no longer his alone to bear, it belonged to all who loved it, to all willing to sacrifice for its preservation. The cursed fruit, once a symbol of tragic legacy, now held the promise of renewal, its power tempered by the wisdom of those who understood its true price. As stars began to prick the twilight sky, Eamon spoke aloud, his voice steady and resolute. "We are the orchard's legacy, its rebirth. And together we will guard it not as solitary sentinels, but as a family forged in the fires of sacrifice and hope." The trees rustled in gentle agreement, their ancient souls stirring with newfound life. The orchard's future was uncertain, as all futures are, but in that moment, beneath the canopy of forgotten kings, a new dawn was breaking, and with it a new chapter began. The dawn broke slowly over the orchard of forgotten kings, the first light of morning filtering through the dense canopy of ancient branches. Each leaf shimmered with dew, and the air was alive with the subtle hum of magic and eternal pulse that resonated with the souls cradled within the orchard's cursed fruit. Eamon stood beneath these towering sentinels, their gnarled trunks twisted by centuries, and breathed deeply the mingled scents of earth, wild herbs, and the bittersweet aroma of ripening fruit. His gaunt face, weathered by years of solitude and battle, softened in the gentle light. For the first time in many moons, a flicker of hope kindled in his chest. Beside him, Scylla knelt to tend a newly planted sapling, her nimble fingers brushing away stray leaves as she whispered a blessing learned through generations of herbal lore. Her fiery hair caught the sun's rays, a stark contrast to the dark greens and browns of the orchard. Old Bran, stooped but steady, leaned on his gnarled staff, his eyes agleam with the wisdom of ages. "The orchard breathes anew," he murmured, voice gravelly yet filled with warmth. "The kings rest, and their souls find peace in the turning of the seasons." Eamon nodded solemnly, the weight of that peace not lost on him. The battles had been fierce, and the cost had been dear. Friends lost, wounds still etching beneath his cloak, and the ever-present burden of guardianship that pressed upon his soul like the heavy branches overhead. But now, as the orchard stirred with new life, he felt the tides of despair recede, replaced by a cautious but resolute hope. "We have work still," Eamon said quietly, voice steady but soft. "The orchard is wounded by war, and the scars of conflict run deep. We must heal these lands if the legacy is to endure." Sela smiled, a rare softness in her usually determined gaze. Together. Farther along the orchard's edge, Lyra darted among the shadows, her steps light and sure. The forest around her seemed to lean closer, whispering secrets in a language only the trees and those who listened could understand. Her green eyes sparkled as the voices of monarchs long past echoed faintly on the wind, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the distant song of birds. She paused, hand resting on the bark of an ancient oak, feeling the pulse of magic that bound the orchard to the world itself. It was a bond forged through sacrifice and guarded by those who understood that power and legacy intertwined like roots beneath the soil. As the morning sun climbed higher, Nessa moved with measured grace through a shaded glade. Her hands glowing faintly with the healing light she summoned from the depths of nature's wellspring. A young sapling, its leaves bruised and branches broken from the recent siege, stood before her. Gently, she laid her hands upon it, murmuring words of restoration and life. The wounds began to fade, the leaves brightening to a vibrant green, and the sapling straightened as though breathing anew. Around her, the soft hum of the orchard's magic swelled, a quiet symphony of resilience and renewal. Eamon approached, a rare smile breaking the solemn lines of his face. "Your hands mend more than just trees, Nessa." She glanced up, eyes meeting his with quiet understanding. "We all heal in time, Eamon, even the deepest wounds." As the day waned, the orchard grew silent beneath the settling dusk. At its heart, Eamon stood alone, cradling a single cursed fruit in his palm. Unlike the fruits that had once been harbingers of sorrow and power twisted by greed, this one glowed softly with a serene light. It pulsed gently, a symbol not of curse, but of the eternal cycle of legacy and rebirth. Around him, the trees whispered in voices both ancient and new, a chorus of kings whose stories would endure beyond the confines of time. He breathed deeply, the cool evening air filling his lungs, and allowed himself a moment of peace. The orchard was no longer merely a place of shadows and forgotten pain. It was a living testament to endurance and sacrifice. The battles had carved their mark upon it, but so too had the hands of those who dared to protect and renew. "We will stand guard," Eamon vowed softly to the silent grove, not as solitary sentinels, but as a circle bound by trust and purpose. From the shadows, Syla, Old Bran, Lyra, and Nessa emerged quietly, joining him in the fading light. Together, they formed a new covenant, guardians not just of fruit and soil, but of memory, hope, and the promise of a future where the past's burdens might transform into strength. The orchard pulsed once more beneath their feet, alive with the magic of kings and guardians alike. And as night fell, the stars above twinkled through the branches like distant crowns, silent witnesses to a new dawn. Yet even in this moment of renewal, Eamon's thoughts lingered on the future. The world beyond the orchard's borders was ever restless, and threats would surely come again. But with allies at his side, and the orchard's magic woven into their very souls, he felt ready to meet whatever challenges awaited. For the Orchard of Forgotten Kings was not merely a place of endings, it was a beginning. A cycle unbroken, a story unfinished, and a sanctuary where legacy could breathe and blossom anew. And so, with the dawn rising bright and full of promise, Eamon took up his ancient pruning knife once more, stepping forward into the light of a new day.